So thank you for coming to this panel. Um, we've had the India conference for several years now, and every year I tend to moderate this panel. And we were just talking before this, and it reminded me, the discussion we had reminded me of a story, which is that a person was getting married for the first time. And as he was getting married, he discovered that his fiancée had been married. This was her fourth marriage. And so he was pretty nervous, wondering, what's this going to be like? She's clearly pretty experienced, I'm not. And then they get married, and she says, I don't know how to tell you this, but I really have no experience, so, I'm not quite sure how this is going to work. And he says, that's really confusing. This is your fourth marriage. And so she says, yeah, the first one I was really young. I met a sailor at a bar. We just decided, we got drunk, we got married. And next morning he was gone. So I never saw him again. I got the thing annulled. And then I decided to go to the other extreme. Went to a man from the church. He was a pastor. I didn't do my research. And it turned out that they were a celibate order. And so that didn't work out too well. After a while, I got fed up with that. And then I decided I was going to go with someone who had a good career, good prospects. And so I went to an Indian entrepreneur. So he said, well, what happened then? He said, every day he'd come back and he said, this is going to be great. This is the new way. Things are going to happen, and nothing will happen. So I think, each year the same question gets asked, which is this the time that India changes? Is this the time that entrepreneurship opens up? And every year we have a lot of enthusiasm around it, and the next year we ask the same question again. And so I think my hope is that today in the panel we'll be able to talk to people who actually have experience, and that what we get from them is a bit of the granularity and the color around this, to say what's working, what's not, what are the challenges, what are the things that are really great about trying to open something up. So the format of this is going to be, we're going to do 25 minutes or so of a few questions that I'm asking, and then we'll open it up to your questions. So at the beginning, if you could, just going for that order, introduce yourselves and give us your perspective.
Hi. It's great to be on campus, sitting on the other side. I'll just take you through my experience. So I was happy in at Citi, working for 10 years. It was kind of a startup, early 2000s, working in consumer finance. And then the startup bug, kind of hit me myself. So I said 2008. Let's start a company. And the company that I set up basically gives loans to small businesses. Great opportunity area because financial sector reforms, happening and things like that. Of course, so we recruited about 20, 30 people, and then the 2008 crisis happened, right? And I still remember sitting in a room with some 20, 30 people who had recently joined with me, thinking that's going to be a great startup and everything, and saying, in this market, who's going to give us money to lend, and who are we going to lend to, right? Because everything seems to be, breaking down around us. So of course, a lot of challenges. Our license got delayed, our equity got pulled back, and things like that. But nevertheless, we started in, it delayed us for about a year. And today we are sitting at about a $400 million book, loans that have been given out to small businesses. Companies doing well. We got about 40 locations, 75 branches, and things like that. So I think my learning, which I could share, is that what we learned was that if you have a lot of conviction in your idea, if you think there is a real opportunity and you've studied it, then no matter what the environment, you got to stick to it, and things should work out. So that's a little bit from my side.
Atyant Capital, is a firm I co-founded about 9 years ago. What we do is, I run one of those interesting animals called a long-only hedge fund, if such a thing exists. So long-only is what we do in terms of investing, and hedge fund is the fees we charge. But anyway, Professor Ghosh asked me to talk a little bit about how we got started. So I went to the other #1 business school called Wharton. We just keep changing the publications for the rankings. But I did my undergrad at Wharton. I did high school in India, very competitive, very focused, straight A type. When I was at college, I got hooked to the Austrian School of Economics, and unfortunately, they didn't teach that at school. So I spent way too much time understanding what Hayek and Mises, etc., and Keynes and that whole debate. So it turns out that I didn't get very good grades, and that's usually somewhere a story of an entrepreneur. So I didn't get a job, and then I went back to India. I started buying and selling stocks, and I said, hey, this is easy. Looks like I could do this for a long time. Along with my business partners, I started my fund in '05. We started with $1 million. We almost closed shop in '08, '09. But since I'm sitting here, we didn't. Along the way, I thought, share some of my perspectives. I wrote a book on investing in India. We currently manage about 200 million. Smallish for the space, but for the India opportunity, it's decent sized.
Hello. My name is Habil Khurakiwala, and I started a pharmaceutical company way back, 45 years back. Our family was involved in a retail business, and I just graduated from Purdue in pharmacy at that time. And therefore, I had a great opportunity, in spite of my family involved, to do something on your own. And I think over the years, we have built up this company. Today, it is about 10,000 people. We are in pharmaceutical, biotech, and we also have hospitals. In India, we have base in US, we have base this. But one of the things which is important is that since it is a long history of 45 years, how do you sustain it, this entrepreneurship drive? And that is there naturally in a person, basically. So I have able to transform the organization every 10, 12 years into an entirely different kind of organization. And that is how we have grown and achieved what we are today. Just to give you an example, when India liberalized, at that time, it was just India was the only focus. After liberalization, we thought that we are now going to compete globally. The a new patent act is coming. So how do you compete in the pharmaceutical industry globally? So that is where we decided to go global, invest in research. 10, 15 years back, 95% of our business was in India. Today, 80% of our business is outside India. We invest 10% of our investment in research, and we have research center not only in India, but in US and in UK. And we have about 20% of our people working outside India. So I think that is the kind of transformation one can seek in life. Because whatever, you may succeed once, but if you continue to do the same thing and incremental improvement, I think that's the end of what you can do in life. But over the years, you need to revisit, and the challenge before us today is, from a global company, how do I become a research-based company? And that's the next challenge we have in next 10, 15 years. So you continuously evolve and grow and accept much larger challenge. So bottom line is, think big all the time.
So just around 2 years ago, I co-founded Capital Float, which is a fintech startup based in Bangalore. And essentially, we are an online platform that provides working capital financing to small and medium enterprises across the country, from a new age technology startup at its early stages to a traditional business that's either selling offline or trying to enter the digital marketplace. But just, I think, about 3 years ago, I was actually sitting where most of you are sitting now. So I was a business school student, not at HBS, but at Stanford. And I had this desire to move back to India and start a company. And that's what it started out as, right? Literally at that. And I wasn't really sure what I could go back and do. And as a former consultant with an MBA, I realized I actually knew nothing about starting a business in India, or did not really have skills to do pretty much anything in the real world. But I had a desire to do this, right? And that was the point at which, actually, just where many of you would be now in your second year, I teamed up with a other classmate of mine who actually came from manufacturing background in India, and we just decided that we weren't going to go back to our previous jobs. We were going to move to Bangalore, a city where I'd spent a grand total of 3 days in my life prior to that, and start a company. And that's how this began, right? Obviously, going back to India was a bit of a change, right? We had, in true business school fashion, done an independent study, researched various business models, come up with this whole set of very interesting ideas that we had seen in the Valley. And all of that went into the trash can when we landed in Bangalore. And we started anew, trying to figure out what an authentic business model in India could look like. And we actually spent about 6 months looking through, kind of trying to figure out what got us excited, right? Where did we feel like we could make an impact? And where was a model where two guys like us could actually build something scalable? And what we realized was, there are several verticals in India and people extremely passionate with real domain expertise starting each of those. But across industries, what you see is a chronic constraint on accessing financing as an entrepreneur, right? So what we decided to do at that point was actually start the business of funding other businesses. And that's how Capital Float was born. And the last 1.5 years have obviously seen its shares of ups and downs. I think we've gone through one early round of funding with all the pangs that entails. We recently closed a $30 million Series A led by Sequoia and a couple of other large funds. And today have about over 150 small businesses that we finance in over 12 cities in India. But it's still very much early on in the process, right? And I think as we look ahead, questions of team, scalability, all the things that I think folks like Bhavish in the morning have seen is what we're looking ahead to tackle.
Thanks, Shashank. So I'm HBS 07, Section E. Professor Ghosh wanted me to talk about my journey. Right? It's been 7 years since I graduated, and some of the choices I've made in becoming an entrepreneur. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'd say a recovering failed serial entrepreneur. And some of the choices I've made. And so, quick background on myself, comm science engineer, started off as a programmer, and I've lived pretty much globally. Lived in the Valley, was tech lead, lived in London, doing engineering, managing engineering team, Boston, and then New York. The first choice I had to make is a choice that Professor Salman will say, don't do. And the choice was, do I go start a company or build a company right after business school, or do I go and become a consultant? And I didn't follow his advice. I joined BCG, and I spent 2 years with BCG. And I'll tell you one thing. People over here who want to become entrepreneurs, go start a company now. The 2.5 years that you have where you don't have any money to pay, any loans to pay, your loans will kick in after 6 months. You have access to an advisory team that is unprecedented. We'll talk about team building, how tough it is for business school students to build technology teams because you don't have the respect. You can do that here. And so that's my first piece of advice. I didn't follow it, but start the company. The second thing I want to talk about is how tough it is as an entrepreneur, right? My first company was a bad idea. And it didn't do that well, right? It took me a while to accept failure in the company. I can talk about it now because on my third startup, I think we're doing pretty well. And it's easy to do that. But the first time was very tough, accepting failure. But as an entrepreneur, you have to know that 99% of startups fail. And so be prepared for that and plan for that, right? I was able to do that because my family, my spouse was very supporting, right? And she was the breadwinner in some ways. Helps to have planned to go become an entrepreneur for a much longer time. So I think as the panel goes on, we'll probably talk about that also.
So, we've got an interesting juxtaposition here of at least 3 of the panelists who almost failed, one who admits to failing. And so it's a sort of a representation of the challenges that entrepreneurs face. What I'd like you to do is to think about, in India, in the Indian context, what's the biggest challenge that you see, in particular if you think that it's different from what entrepreneurs here might face? As you go in, what surprised you? What were the things that you had to really work on because it's hard to do in India? Anyway.
I think it's very difficult to start a new activity on your own in India, because I think even a big organization finds it difficult to do business in India. So, but at the same time, that's a general scenario. But at the same time, there are a lot of areas in India where the involvement of government is minimal. And if you can identify those areas like retail, like information technology, like logistic, where government involvement is very limited, I think the ground available to start a business here or anywhere else in the world is the same. The difference is going to be that India is a very fast growing economy. And even today also, what we see, this growth of 6%, 7%, 5%, 9, 10% achieved over the last 15 years. I think if someone believes that this has happened because of government intervention and to have this level of growth, it's only government achieved is reduce little bit of bureaucracy and open up the economy. And the dynamism of India is basically the little entrepreneurs who start business every time and seek the opportunity. So I think the India's story is unlike China, which is entrepreneurship driven fundamentally for India's growth. And that is going to continue much larger because that is what is our strength. Because we learn to do things, because India is so difficult to do things there. So we learn to overcome the hurdles we face all the time. Here things are very easy to do this, then you need only an idea to overcome the hurdle. There it is much more than that. And I know a number of management students who come out and they are becoming a very successful entrepreneur, and some of them are doing in the business area, some are doing in a social area like education, creating a different model of teaching and learning. So I think it's up to individual basically what you want to do.
So you just said that you want to stay away from areas that are regulated. The three of you are in capital markets that are quite heavily regulated. What's your experience been with that, with the interface with the government and the regulation?
See, I think if you look at, of course, we are in an industry which is heavily regulated. If you're lending out there, you got the central bank who's like on you every year, right? At every step. I think it's been, our experience has been pretty good in that space because, see, the fundamental issue is that you have to identify the opportunity, right? And that concept of just making quick money should not be there. I mean, if you're looking at the opportunity which is fundamentally sustainable, which is long term, I don't think regulation is going to really affect you that much. And as far as the environment is concerned, I mean, of course, if you're, coming into, battling out the government at every step of your business, yes, you're going to find that a bit difficult. But I have a contrarian view there. In India, there's so many opportunities right now, and this is the right time to really get in there. Maybe after 3 years or 4 years, they may not be there. But if you're starting up something in India, you got to have your eyes open. There are problems, and that is why there is an opportunity. So you can't expect to be making 30% ROEs and hoping that everything's going to be the environment is going to be clean and the infrastructure is going to be very nice. So you got to take in those hardships, you're going to take in those challenges, and that's why you want to get the returns.
So I think to some extent, the amount of regulation that you want to deal with is a design choice when starting a company, right? And it's a design choice in many ways, right? Because there are, I think, sectors of the economy For example, if you start an app, right, or if you go into a SaaS business, where you fundamentally can avoid regulation to a large extent. We made the conscious choice to go into a regulated business and actually do it the right way, right? So we get a non-banking license from the RBI, engage with the regulator. And I think what our experience has been like is you want to picking a regulator is sort of like picking a parent, right? You want to go with someone who is consistent, reliable, predictable. And in our experience, I think, particularly in financial services, the RBI has actually been that. But at the end of the day, I do think it's a design choice. We were discussing this at dinner last night. It's a similar issue when it comes around having to deal with graft in India. It is a choice that you make as to where you want to start a business and how you want to build that business.
So just, if you could spend a minute just on that last point. One of the perceptions is that to get things done, there's a lot of corruption, a lot of graft, particularly if you're in heavily regulated, heavily controlled areas. What's your experience been with that?
So I think the financial sector is actually the best sector. I think SEBI, in terms of regulation, SEBI, Reserve Bank of India, and Ministry of Finance are probably the cleanest institutions you can work with, obviously, relatively speaking. So I think on a regulation basis, I've never encountered graft. Yeah, maybe companies we invest in talk about graft. I think the graft happens more in real economy orientation, where you have to deal with labor, deal with power, deal with sales tax, stuff like that, or VAT and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think I agree, because in a physical world, there is a lot of corruption. But I think in financial sector, you have a tough regulation. But because in physical world, you have to go and get the permission every time you need to do something. Whereas in many areas, it's just the laws, you follow the law, you are okay there. So that is not the problem to work it. So therefore, if you look at the economy, the physical world is about 25% of our GDP. Agriculture is another 25%. 50% of Indian world is either financial sector or service sector or technology and so on and so forth. So there's plenty of option available. But one thing I would like to say it's not, entrepreneurship is not really about whether doing well or environment is right. This is only a small part of it. I think from an individual point of view, you need to have an idea and a passion for it, really. And you need to stay focused for a long period of time and not expect, as my colleague said, a quick return. It never happens. It's a very tough road ahead for a few years, but that is where you need a belief that what you are doing is right, not it is fashionable to do it.
So let's open it up for questions. To the panel, we've got a range of perspectives. It's interesting to me that almost every piece of advice that you got from one of the panelists, somebody else contradicted in what they said. And that's the nature of entrepreneurship, that the rules tend to be really, really hard to pin down. And so we sort of make up our classes as we go along, and we say that this is true, and then we contradict ourselves a little bit later. But questions? Go ahead.
My question is, the biggest challenge that I think is we don't have that many incubation centers. So the only incubation center that I'm aware of is IIM Ahmedabad. They have the entrepreneurship, innovation and incubation center. So for people who come out of normal colleges, which are not the IIMs or the IITs, we don't have, so when we start a company, after like 5 years down the line, it's perfect. But 10 years down the line, when you get stuck, you just don't know what to do next. So there are not mentors, not enough institutions where you can go and get help. So what's your take about it, or whether I'm wrong?
I don't think the problem is incubation centers. I agree with you. They are few, but normal colleges, IIT Madras, I'm in Chennai. IIT Madras has a fantastic incubation center. It's a 400,000 square foot facility. I'm on the advisory board of the incubator there. The problem, I'll share an experience with you. So, when we started our fund, we started in Mumbai. And we were in a beat-up building and car, the elevator didn't work and all of that. So we had this intern, he was a friend's brother from London who wanted to come and spend the summer with us. And then he walked in the door the first day and he said that in London, all the hedge funds are in Mayfair. And here we were in a beat-up building and car. I think the problem, to Professor Ghosh's point of doing a startup between the US and India is that the proverbial garage where most startups start is just much more comfortable in the US. The garage in India is very, very uncomfortable. And the thing is, if you quickly get success, then it's fine. But if you don't get success, then the very aspect of entrepreneurship, which is the tenacity that keeps you going through, the additional battle of battling living in India sort of starts to wear on you. So I think there are advisors, there are mentors, you can find them, lots of successful people who will mentor you. But I think the problems are a little bit different.
Let me throw another perspective. When we compare US and India, I think US is a very, very competitive world, even though doing things would be easy. But you look at the competitive scenario, it's enormously tough to succeed here because a lot of ideas, a lot of things are happening. On the other hand, in Indian context, it is very tough to be successful. But I think the level of opportunities which is available because of the sheer growth, the development which is taking place, all these are of magnitude far higher than you would find anywhere else. And therefore, if you have passionate about it, if you have a good idea, and if you are prepared to rough it out in the first few years, I think the chances of success are also equally large.
So there's actually a few incubators, non-traditional, not from the IIMs of the world, that are beginning to start in India. In the US, when you talk about Y Combinator, you talk about Techstars, right? 500 Startups is a name that comes up, and they're actually doing a lot in India right now. So from an accelerator perspective, there are smaller ones. I think there's one in Delhi that I know about. There's a few in Bombay. So if you start looking around, I know there's also this train yatra that happens for 30 days, right? Where people basically, entrepreneurs get on a train and basically they're going around the country. So there are opportunities that are coming up. There are people who are going back and starting. 500 Startup is definitely there. I know Pankaj just spent a lot of time in India. So there are opportunities like that that are coming up.
But in your experience in the US, how important was the infrastructure that already exists to getting you to the next level?
Very, very helpful, right? I mean, when we started, so I actually went through an incubator in New York called Entrepreneurs Roundtable. And this is my third startup. I still chose to do that. And it really helped me, right? It helped me because I got in touch with one of my mentors is the CEO of Bitly. He ended up coming up as an investor in us. And there are many such people like that who basically helped us through that journey from the network perspective. But then there are soft services, right? We had a lot of money from Amazon Web Services that is free. We just got around $100,000 from Rackspace to spend, right? So that is money that you get from the traditional incubators in the US that you probably don't. But I know that that is happening in India, right? If you find the right people, a lot of the soft services in India are getting solved for, right? The lawyer cost, we didn't pay much. It's all deferred, right? I think in India, you probably still have to do that, so there are challenges. I think the other challenge that is in India is how to raise money, right? What kind of money you're raising? Is it convertible debt? Is it an equity round, which is your first seed round of money that you're raising? The US is very institutionalized, right? There's a concept of a convertible note that most people understand, right? Some of them will come with a cap. Some of them will come with a discount to Series A. These are questions I think that as an entrepreneur you should think about when you start a company in India, because there's education that has to happen, which is much easier in India. But people are getting it, right? I mean, it's not that tough, but it's something that you will have to explain to people how a convertible note works. So
what's interesting in the panel is that you look around and everybody on the panel, partly because of where we are, has been educated here. At least has had part of the education here and gone back. I think that, so there's an ecosystem of people who go back and know each other and so on from connections. It becomes much more challenging for people who are not in the IITs, IIMs, but also are not from any of the institutions here, to go back and connect into this network. But this is a very small and well-connected network within it, but it's not like here. Other questions? Go ahead.
So one of the biggest differences I see between the US and India is this notion of an open collaboration, where in the US, at least with my friends, I feel like everyone's very open to sharing the ideas and getting feedback on it, versus like India where there's this mindset about not sharing ideas because someone else will see it. Do you feel like that's changing as the community of entrepreneurship is growing, or is that just something people still look around and not share it with you?
So let's start with the premise itself. Do you see a difference in sharing versus people being more proprietary about ideas?
So I think the cliche when people talk about doing business in India is it's getting better. But I actually think in this case it is getting better. What to just riff off the points made earlier, right? I think what you're starting to see is communities coming around entrepreneurship in India and hubs like you've got in Silicon Valley, but not to the same degree, right? So Bangalore is obviously such a hub. I think in Bombay, Powai is a similar hub. You're seeing those coming up in places like Ahmedabad, Pune, etc. And what these are doing, I think, is breaking down that sort of zero-sum mindset that if I tell you something, you're going to steal it from me, right? So legitimately what I have found as something very refreshing in India is pretty much anyone will give you time to discuss anything, right? Provided, of course, within reason, right? And what that means is you can have a discussion with your competitors, right? About something obviously that takes into account those sensitivities, but you can have that discussion, right? We frequently end up engaging with companies in the space to discuss things that are of common cause. And on that point, right, being an entrepreneur in India is so hard that when you have other people around you who are actually facing similar challenges, there's a fair amount that can be done through collective action. So I think what you're starting to see now is in the e-commerce space, for example, everyone is competing fiercely, but when it comes to, for example, approaching the government, right, commonly dealing with issues of taxation, you're seeing those businesses actually come together. I think similarly in the financial services space, when the RBI or SEBI puts out an idea paper, you see companies coming together to actually put forward a set of recommendations. So there is some of that, I think, cultural hangover of, you know, if it's my idea, then I'm not going to give it away. But I think we're starting to see a change, and I think that change is really being driven by the fact that A, entrepreneurial communities are developing, and B, there is so much common cause between entrepreneurs that often ends up trumping the competitive instinct.
Questions? Go ahead.
Do you think the presence of large conglomerates in India helps reverse the entrepreneurial climate?
Sorry. So I'm just going to repeat the question. I think that the presence of large conglomerates in India helps or hurts the entrepreneurial community. So, you know, I broaden the question a little bit to say the Indian establishment of big business houses has been consistent for a long time. So there are 10, 15, whatever you count it as, and they have very strong connections, distribution networks, connections to the government. You know, they're well established as full infrastructure systems. Is breaking into that really difficult, or is that a factor, or is it here things are more fluid?
See, if you look at India, the big business of today and 20 years back, the names are very different. Those who were very big earlier times, many of them have disappeared, 70%, 80% of them, and there are new ones. So that demonstrates really the ability to government connectivity and influence is there in India in almost all countries. India is no exception to that. But that link is becoming weaker and weaker for success, basically. The whole IT industry has come, as I mentioned, we were not existing 20 years back in India. So I think conglomerates are there in where you need a lot of physical infrastructure, physical aspect of the government. But the rest of the economy, I think it doesn't make a difference. In fact, the big businesses trying to come into this part of business, and very, very few successes are there. Because their whole orientation is very different than what you need to succeed in financial sector or service sector or a newer economy.
I'm not from business school. I went to law school. And I don't practice law. I'm an actor.
Wow. Wow.
But I just have a fundamental problem to understand. I know you all went to business school and come to make a lot of money, not immediately, in long term. What else do you want to do with this company? Set up business, you can talk to start a company, they want to work or something. What is it you really want to do with this company? Obviously, UK is going to India to start a big company. Of course, you want to be millionaires and billionaires, but what is it you really want to do to the country, to the people, and to the
So they get the question. The question, I think if I just had to restate it, would be that what's the purpose? So there's obviously a common denominator of financial success that everybody has, but in a place like India where there's so much need, do these companies have a broader social or economic purpose other than enrichment of the farmers?
Yeah, now I see all of them have only finance, capital.
Sure. I'll take that. See, of course, if you want to succeed, the fundamental issue is that you have to have a larger purpose. I mean, you just don't, start a company just to make money. Because if you don't have a larger purpose, when you'll be hit with, a lot of roadblocks and issues, you'll be the first to, kind of fall away. If you don't have the larger purpose to kind of, take you through. So that's a fundamental, coming to as to where are we going to take these companies that we've started and what's the larger purpose. At least coming to financial services space, the space that I work in, and coming back to the previous question that was asked, as to large business houses and the presence of, large business, how does it hamper the startup world? If you see in India traditionally, whether it was the manufacturing sector or anything to do with natural resources, there were large business houses with, of course, all the government connections and everything which were controlling most of the market. And but that was not true for, say, services, and that's where you're seeing maximum, startups coming up or innovation happening. In financial services, if you see, 75% of credit that goes into the Indian credit market is still controlled by nationalized banks. I mean, government took that choice, in the 70s. They start privatizing, in the late 90s, and now things are changing. So I think the government and the overall society is also realizing that if the country has to grow, control has to pass off from few hands to many people, and that you take as a fundamental strength of our democracy, our people, the fact that we've got a lot of young people with expectations and hope, so aspirations, so that's changing. So I don't think that going forward is going to get easier as we go forward rather than more difficult.
So let me just ask the question more directly.
Yeah, I can answer that question.
Can I just ask a slightly
Yeah,
different
okay.
So the question is, when you make decisions every day, there's a question of survival, shareholder return, all of that. And then there's the question about what am I doing? What's my purpose? How do you balance that, or how much do you weigh each of these two things?
I think we believed always the purpose of a business is obviously to make money and surplus. But you cannot survive on a long-term and sustainable basis if you don't have a larger purpose. For example, we are a pharmaceutical health company, and we have a byline, life wins. Means anything we do basically must improve the quality of life. Whether we have a hospital, we have medicine. So I think unless you have this kind of larger purpose, and that is interlinked with the success, because that will keep you on a straight path of doing the right thing always, which is good for society, which is good for your customers, and which is also good for your shareholders. Because there is interwoven. There is not, very few businesses can survive long term if one is looking only for the self-interest. You will survive and for a while and make a lot of money. But if you are looking at 20 years, 30 years, 50 years survival of business, I think this, including community and society as a part of a larger purpose, as one of the purpose for business is very essential. And therefore, that is how you make a difference. Organization must be able to make a difference in the community or in the business they are operating. So I think this kind of purposes drives the organization to take big risk, achieve, ask for things which is not easy to do sometimes and difficult, and does not get into area of complacency. Go, you are big, you are making money, let me look at my quarterly result and do things. I think that is very important to do that.
So I think there's personal motivation and then there's the business, right? I think ultimately businesses have to make money to be sustainable. And thanks to some VCs in India, that boundary constraint has been removed for tech companies. But at the end of the day, they have to make money, right? As far as personal motivations are concerned, right, to your question, if you want to make money risk adjusted and live a comfortable life, there are far easier ways to do it than to come be an entrepreneur in India, right? Frankly. But I think ultimately, if you want to come and actually follow this path, and to your point, stick with it through the ups and downs, there has to be a larger motivation, right? And for me personally, right, when I graduated from Stanford and looked around, obviously there are great companies coming out of the valley, but at the end of the day, I couldn't help feeling that some amount of the innovation felt quite incremental, right? Is it really worth one's while to get laundry delivered 5 hours faster than it was delivered the other day, right? And it's a bit of an oversimplification, but I saw a lot of that going on as well. Whereas I think the fun really, and ultimately the macro level motivation of being an entrepreneur in India is, at the end of the day, if you have a vision and if you execute against that vision, you will be solving a major problem, right? Whether it's access to financing on our end, whether it's healthcare, whether it's retail, whatever it is. And this is a very unique time to be part of building out large sectors of the economy that haven't existed in this form before. And I think I think one of the questions in this panel has been, what is the right time to go back to India? And that has been endlessly debated year on year. But what we're seeing now, and not necessarily this year, but I think over this decade, is really a lot of these essential services being built out in a country that's growing extremely rapidly. And being an entrepreneur, I think, gives you a ringside view and also a chance to actually be part of that building, and ultimately that's the real motivation to keep you going every day.
Hi, I'm Ashwini. I'm a botany second year, and I am standing at this open light where I'm unsure of whether to accept the fee or I have or to go something. And my question is for Hanuman, Shashank, and specifically, since you guys follow different paths after you graduated, do you have any regrets for the path that you followed? And if not regrets, any insights that we can leverage on in something in the future?
So the path I took, right? I mean, the call I made was I went to BCG for 2 years. The rationale I gave myself at that time was that I'd come from a very strong tech background prior to HBS, and while HBS taught me a lot, I wanted to go do the strategy side first. Also, I wasn't sure at that time that I wanted to be back in tech, and so that consulting would allow me the opportunity to experience different industries and figure out where my calling was. I learned a lot. I actually spent 7 months in the Bombay office where I pretty much ran $200 million business for an insurance company, which is an amazing opportunity. You will never get that at the BCG New York office. But in hindsight, if becoming an entrepreneur is what I wanted to do, then those 2 years were not required, right? Had I known this going in, that I actually wanted to be an entrepreneur, wanted to work in tech, I would have done things differently, right? I think I would have probably gone and worked at a startup, not started my own company, because starting your own company, some people succeed. Shashank is obviously a great example of that. But for most of us, there are too many things happening. You're grappling with building a team, finding your tech co-founders if you're building a tech team, building out your product, raising money, selling, right? And a lot of things, we're just not taught to do all of that. They don't come together in your first startup. By now, I've figured out what I'm good at, where I need help, and how do I build the process. And so I end up raising a lot less money than most people should be raising, and we've still done well in the third startup, right? But it takes a time to get there. So if you really want to do that, I would say go join a startup, figure out what you like, build a functional expertise in yourself that will help you over time, and that could be marketing, could be sales, biz dev, because the CEO is catch-all. But once you're not the CEO of a startup, who are you, right? And you have to have that answer, because when you get acquired, you will have to go work at a bigger company. You'll have to do something. Are you going to be the head of product, marketing, sales? Something you have to be very good at. So build that expertise first. That would be my advice.
So California is a tough place to leave. But there are obviously, I think, days when you're stuck in Bangalore traffic and it's taken 3 hours to have one meeting, when that's frustrating. But I think that's more of a day-to-day, right? Macro level, I would say I definitely have no regrets, because this is something I'd always wanted to do. And I did feel like I spent 4 years at McKinsey as a consultant, and I did feel like I got a lot of the exposure and the variety that had I not gotten prior to doing this, I would have regretted that, right? To the second part of your question, right? I think the big change when you become an entrepreneur, and this is something that I didn't quite realize when I got into this, is to a great extent you become an island, right? Time flows very differently for you. Milestones are completely different from what a lot of your peer group will be facing, right? When I was at McKinsey, if you got promoted 6 months ahead of schedule, you were a rock star. At a startup, you can spend 6 months trying to crack one client account and it doesn't work, right? You can't be checking LinkedIn updates, looking at people go from vice president to this president to that. You will remain the same title, but if your company grows, then that title will be worth something, right? So I think just your sense of progress, how the comparative nature that all of us have, especially those of us who go to business schools, you have to throw that out of the window, I think, over a period of time, right? And I think that is one of the toughest things about this journey. The other thing I would say is there are no pats on the back, and especially after getting feedback through your years at business school, there is no feedback, right? No one's going to be like, great job, right? Even if you achieve a milestone, you probably will feel a little dissatisfied and your team will be thinking about 5 other things that aren't working in the company, right? So no one pats your back. There is very little feedback. Don't really think about appreciation. But I guess on the other side, the great thing about being an island is you are your own master, right? And you control your own destiny. And that's a great, great feeling that I would have no regrets over having given up other things for.
Yeah, I think entrepreneurship is not a career track, right? Entrepreneurship is life. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of us make. So, I'll try and answer what you're trying to ask with a couple of examples. So I have one of my closest friends from Wharton. He's been at Citi for 15 years. Out of undergrad, he's a senior managing director. I think he was very clear from day one that, that's what he wanted to do. He's probably pulling in $1 million, $2 million, whatever, I don't know, a year today. And let me give you an example of another friend also from Wharton. So, out of undergrad, he went to Gleacher, an investment bank. Then he went back to business school. He joined General Atlantic. He was there in New York for 2 years. Then he came to India in 04-05 with General Atlantic. He said, okay, now I have enough private equity under my belt. I've checked all the boxes. Now it's time for me to be an entrepreneur. And then he started an infrastructure fund. And then 08 happened. So before the fund could even take off, now he's doing some real estate and stuff. And I'll give you a final and a third example. So, we're looking at doing a startup in a space in the financial services sector, and we're looking to partner with a team. So the guy who heads the team, he came up to me and he said, what do you think we'll make in our first year? And so we did the numbers, and he says, I make a little bit more than this where I am now. And, if this doesn't work for 2 years, if you're starting to do that kind of math, then, you're in the wrong place. Entrepreneurship is not something you do between undergrad and business school. So you can't hedge your bets. So if this fails, I'll go back to business school and get back in the career track. I don't think it works like that.
So I think we're about out of time. Every year we get students who come in with this feeling of great angst in their faces, and they say, I have this wonderful offer from McKinsey, and I'm thinking of being an entrepreneur, but it's a really hard decision. And the answer is always the same: join McKinsey. If it's such a hard decision, then you're not really ready to do this. And by the way, it shouldn't be such it isn't really that painful. We're really low on everybody's list of people to feel sorry for. That's your choice. And so what you want to do, I think, is we've got a sense of color from the panel on what it really feels like, both to be an entrepreneur, but also some of the unique problems of India. The panel has agreed to stay here for a little bit in case you have questions, because I know a lot of questions will get answered. Thank you very much.